Commanding officer at the Winter Harbor facility when it closed in 2002, so we couldn't have a better spokesman to tell us about what happened there. Jim retired in 2006 after serving for 30 years in the Navy. He went on to the Department of Defense for a posting in Japan, and then for a Department of Defense posting in Thailand. And he and his wife Beth, as I said, live on Goldsboro Point, and we are very pleased to have him join us.
He told me there'd be 7 people, and 3 of them would be my friends. So I'm a little bit more. But yeah, not to drag it out, but yeah, we came here in 1999. I came as the XO first, and then flew up to the CO September 8th, 2001, when the CO's son got in a bad car wreck, and then I officially took over in January. But I just wanted to say I've seen a lot of half of familiar faces. But this place is a joy. I said I spent 30 years in the Navy, and we moved all over the world. This was the friendliest place we were ever stationed at. The 3 years we were here seemed like 10 to us. It just we settled in. We united. I was a Weeblos leader. I was a Boy Scout master. Yeah, this is good. And it's nice to see the community coming out. I'm glad I'm the first one for the speaker series, because that way everybody else can do much better than me. And again, I probably should have titled this a little bit more. Before I start, they're actually Dale Woodard, Goldsboro resident, Township 7. I'm not quite sure exactly where the cutoff line is in his house. On YouTube, if you have time to go on YouTube and search for NSGA Winter Harbor, Dale actually did a really good presentation for the Schoodic Institute a couple years ago. A little bit more technical nature and a little bit built. You know, Dale spent, well, his dad was associated with Stinson's, and Dale grew up and started out at the base as a teenager, and retired out there when we closed the base. So I do recommend that, and I also appreciate that Dave Fanuff, who was another Goldsboro resident, he actually put together a real good history, a 2-volume history of the base too. So my presentation won't be quite as technical as Dale's was, except for some of the aspects of time has gone on enough now that we can actually talk a little bit about what we did. Everybody wondered, why are there a bunch of sailors with no boats or ships in the middle of a national park?
Navigational buoys or something.
Let's see, would you rather be in Norfolk or Winter Harbor? We chose Winter Harbor. Anyway, well, admit, this is a little choppy on my brief one. I actually started out way too, cut it back. You can't talk about Winter Harbor without talking about Elizondo February. His brother and his father were with the J.P. Morgan at the beginning, and became wealthy beyond dreams. So he grew up as a very wealthy kid in the late 1800s, and his family had a February Hall out on Mount Desert Island, gorgeous summer cottage, 12 bedrooms. But he was really intrigued with technology, and he actually was one of the first persons to photograph cells splitting back in the 1910, 1911. I mean, if you could think, what the technology would have took at the time to be able to do that. But he said instead of being a party boy and all that, he really enjoyed the technology side of life. And that's what he said. He grew up as His uncle was, again, partnered with Morgan. His brother ended up with a partner with Morgan. But he focused in, I mean, he had a couple other businesses at the time, too, with some money. But with the house in Bar Harbor, in Marconi, I was going to write it down, I forget. 1901, I think, was the first transatlantic transmission of a radio signal ever. And then Marconi was able to pull that off. And now we're talking, 10, 11, 12 years later, February, basically, he's a ham radio. I mean, he's one of the first 20 licenses for ham radio. He builds this wonderful set out at his brother's cottage out on Mount Desert Island. And then the hostilities in Europe start, and he's listening to stuff that, just like most of us, he spoke fluent German and fluent Italian and fluent English. American education system, fortunately, we're able to keep up with, all of that. As I say, I always say English is my second language and I don't have a first. But, so he's sitting there playing with this, and he comes up with this idea. First, he had a 150-foot schooner called the Ajax. So he came up with this idea because he wanted to do his part for the war effort. He said, I'll donate my ship as a patrol craft for the New England coast if you make me an ensign in the Navy, and I'll run the ship. And the Navy said, well, thank you for the ship. But you can't be an ensign in the Navy. So then he comes up with this, I'm listening to stuff. And so he starts coordinating with the Boston Navy District and stuff, and he said, I will build you a radio station out of my own pocket if you make me an ensign. Actually, he wanted to be a JG because he was in his 30s, and anyway, through a lot of turmoil and stuff. And Dave, with us book, it talks about it. Just a heartache. I mean, literally, 98% of the population would have quit after the first hurdle because he was trying to do this. There was literally nothing to his benefit. There was no fame, there's no money. He just wanted to be a patriot, and he wanted to do this. And he through sheer force of will, and was able to get the Navy to buy into it. Of course, he did have a friend that he'd met up at Campobello. And Franklin was the vice secretary of the Navy at the time, and literally it was that type of leverage that he needed in order to get it. One, he was an Italian immigrant. This is a war in Europe. The military didn't trust amateur radio operators. Who's to say they're not all spies? I mean, so he had to fight through that. Anyway, he got the station up, and in 1917 he was able to get it up and running. The Navy did give him a commission, though, as an ensign, and he spent the next 18 months literally being the most sensitive and radio station on the East Coast. It was pulling in radio signals from South America, all of Europe. The location of the Otter Cliffs accidentally was just literally perfect for HF reception. So he built a radio station, had a great career. War was over. He got out as a lieutenant, and so in the summer of 1919 he got out. Discharged from the Navy, like a lot of the military was after the war, because that was the war to end all wars. We weren't going to need any of that again. Well, not for another month. And then in 1922, he goes out duck hunting, gets pneumonia, and at 42 years old, he dies. I mean, I can't help but think what he could have done 40 or 50 years, if he'd had a full life. He was a very unique person. Anyway, Otter Cliffs became a full radio station. They actually got recompense in the end, the Navy did pay him back for the land and that, but he donated the equipment out of his own pocket. And then the radio station ran, you know, from when he left, 1919 to 1935. Well, we all know Rockefeller. Well, not personally. Well, some of you might. So when he's building Acadia National Park, I mean, this is through the middle of the Depression. The Otter, you know, the picture of the Otter Cliff, I mean, it had gone slightly in disrepair, and he wanted to put a road through the middle where it was. So he ends up working a deal. The Navy finally relents and says, if you can find us the same idyllic reception area within 50 miles, and it doesn't cost the Navy anything, we'll swap. And so he starts. Said he did pay for a feasibility study to identify, you know, the Big Moose Island out at Schoodic. It was actually good. The Schoodic had been donated to the park, you know, earlier, so it was a good opportunity. When I was actually at the base, the urban myth was he paid for everything and then just gave it to the Navy. I should have realized that Rockefeller didn't get to be a billionaire by giving away all of his money. So he did put some of it in, but he actually gets Congress to up the national parks budget to pay to build the Rockefeller Building and the radio station and all of that. So he used his architecture. You know, Ghostwriter Attenbury came over and did it and built what they call Building 1, which we all refer to even to this now as the Rockefeller Building. But it was built by the National Park Service and not by the Navy, because anybody knows a Navy base, we build Quonset huts. We don't build cedar, beamed, brick, steel, interior steel that the Rockefeller Building is. So, yeah, it was good that he did that, and we ended up with an unparalleled Navy base, hidden in plain sight, in the middle of a national park. And that is where we start. In 1935, said they were able to get it, said $250,000 in 1930 to start construction. The road in that had actually been out there. They did some improvements. Initially, the Navy got 26 acres, and February 28th of 1935, the radio station in Winter Harbor started with Chief Max Gunn in charge. Chief had actually been out at Otter Cliffs too before he came over from here. Again, I took this out of the national parks write up for nomination for for a historical place. But it really, to me, fits it off. You know, it's a 2.5-story, 8-state chateau-esque structure. You know, 2 pavilions, an enclosed courtyard, a facade of the building, expansive terrace at the back, Renaissance half timbers, a masonry exterior. It was unbelievable. And at the time, that was it. So we had an operations room for the radio room, and all that was there on the first floor. If you're facing the building, looking at the front of it, the left-hand side was the operations room and that, and then the rest was offices and barracks and a couple of apartments for the officers. I was actually, when I took over as CO in January of 2002, we only had 6 months before the base closed, and I said, well, do you want to move into base? Yes! So my wife and my 2 kids, we moved out to the base, and what a great experience. I mean, it just is. It was wonderful. But that's right after completed the construction, and you see the circular road that we have today. You can see barely the antenna towers in the back. These pictures are actually doing more of the actual construction. But again, it was superb. There's just no other way to do it. This is actually the pump house and the generator house. So there was power that ran out to it, main and trees and power. But we did have a full diesel generator out there that provided backup from the very beginning of the base. In fact, that was actually one of the things that kind of hindered starting operations. Is the Navy said, we ain't going to do it until that generator is installed and working. And it was delayed coming out of Boston, but they were able to get it up to the main winter down the road, get it installed. So this was kind of interesting when I was doing the research. It said the reception at Otter Cliffs had actually been what Otter Cliffs had just a wide open view, and his buddy, the old Bar Harbor Country Club, which he rented in order to build the radio station. Nobody told them they could cut down trees. So we moved to Schoodic. The Park Service let us cut down trees around building the building and the antenna and all that, build direction finding site. They wouldn't let them cut down any more trees. And that actually caused a problem for the first 5 years. The radio reception in Schoodic was not nearly as good as it was at Otter Cliffs. And the Navy chafed over that. Park Service wouldn't relent. So Max Gunn, who was back for his third tour, now got commissioned, like I did. So I went from enlisted to officer. He's out there. He hears about Pearl Harbor. He goes, there was a civilian conservation camp that was building some of the trails for Scoop Mountain. He went down, commandeered the CCC crew, and brought them up, and cut down all the trees. I don't care what the park says, we're doing it. And it was literally, as he said, it was just like a veil being lifted over the radio station. And then Winter Harbor became, again, one of the premier radio stations on the East Coast. There you can see some of the early receiver antennas that they were building. And then here the transmitter site that eventually was actually moved to Prospect Harbor, where they now Dead Alpha is. They're not Dead Alpha anymore, because now it's Space Command. I'm sure they're all nice people. But anyway, so again, you can see that the Schoodic Loop Road was actually, I won't say I was surprised, but this was actually built right at the beginning of all this too, for the park and the development of the tourist side of it. There was some restriction. The Navy wanted a 300-foot tower in the park, and they ended up compromising it like 210. And I should have put this as a full, but you can see the two antennas actually framing both sides of the Rockefeller Building. And they actually held the wire. The antennas, that's actually something that a lot of people don't understand. How many people have ever been close to Cutler? So you see all the poles and all that. The poles only hold up the wire. The poles have nothing other than the height. They're not the antenna. And that's what this up here too. I will admit the first time I drove to Cutler, I saw the antenna and go, oh good, we're almost there. Then we kept driving and driving and driving and driving and driving. Now, again, this is just early 1939, I think. Again, you just barely see the two antenna towers. And again, that little piece in the middle of the 26 acres of Schoodic was the beginning of the radio station. Now they did move the DF hut instruction on this. I didn't learn very well. So here, they actually had the DF site that was attached to with the transmitter site.
What's DF?
DF is direction finding. So they not only could receive it, but they could get a rudimentary line of bearing and go that way. We'll actually talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the Korea site, because that actually was our bread and butter. And he said in the early 40s, they built the up on the hill behind the Rockefeller Building. That's when they built the operations room up there, and with the war expanded operations, went up to from 11 to 40 people, and then kept expanding from there. And then then we start hitting up the more modern era with canoes and cars, just like Schoodic is now. But again, there are not very many sailors that can say they lived in a place like that. It didn't happen. So in 1935, they opened up as U.S. Navy Radio Direction Finding Station, and their supplemental radio station, and then Navy radio station, actually receiver. I was going to change that, and I forgot. And then in 1958, came Naval Security Group activity. So World War II, everybody's heard about, all of the breaking of the codes and all of that. So the Navy had Op-2G, and the Navy had a real robust effort to try to get into the Japanese and the German codes. And they were very successful. So that was kind of a sub in Navy intelligence. And then in the mid-50s, they decided we need an organization to do this and manage it big picture. With the Cold War starting, or the Cold War heating up. But, so Naval Security Group Command was established. If anybody's been down at DC, there's this roundabout there by American University. I'm getting my east-west stuff. But right off of that circle, there was, at the time, it was a woman's school that the Navy took over during the war effort. And the intelligence people there, and then Naval Security Group Command set that up Nebraska Avenue as their headquarters. Then they started looking out, where can we go that we can hear the bad guys? Well, went to Harvard. It's got the best reception on the East Coast. So that's when it was transferred, because before it was a receiver site, had some transmitter functions, but for the most part, it listened in on the ship, so they could, this is me. I mean, all Morse code, during the war, and then, started with teletypes and stuff like that. But by the time the late 50s came, there were more teletype than not. And the receiver sites were more important, and that's when they got, not divorced, but separated from the regular Navy communications folks to the Naval Security Group Command. So they said, through the war, the station still was up and running and all that, but let's talk to the slide, but this was perfect area for Naval Security Group Command. In fact, they had already proved itself in the early 50s. They actually identified the Korea site. We initially started with 451 acres and ended up with like 720 by the time we closed the base. But again, the Korea Heath, slightly marsh area for receiving radio waves, was actually even better than Schoodic, which is why, plus we had a lot more room. So that's why we developed the direction finding went to Korea, even in the early 50s. Again, this probably pictures at our at our best. We had the housing here that was on base. This all was the barracks. We had a galley, basically a restaurant for all the crew to eat at. It literally was the best Navy food I ate in 30 years in the Navy. And I was on a couple admiral staffs. The Rockefeller Building, this was Building 10, was built in 1947. That was our, initially it was the admin and barracks, as well as the club and a little burger joint in the basement. I still would walk through it and go, how did they fit all of that in this house? But we had a full fire department that down in here. Auxiliary. We actually had a brush truck that we used for mutual aid throughout down East Maine. Right in here, one of our environmental engineers came up with a reed system for our waste effluent. So all our effluent from the wastewater treatment plant met all acceptable discharge standards, but the Navy wanted to do it even better, so we would actually discharge into the reed bed. And the reeds took out everything else. It was a really neat system that was very eco-friendly. We actually won some environmental awards as the base continued on. And I said, the water tower, we had a bowling alley, we had a child care center, we had a gymnasium, we had public works up here, we had a gas station, we had what they call a commissary, so we had a grocery store on the base.
You had a theater also.
We had a theater. It just, if you're going to be in the middle of nowhere, this was not a bad place to be, particularly if you're married with kids. I mean, we talk about Mayberry, or talk about we all remember Mayberry. This was Mayberry. Each guard had one bullet, and it just. I was supposed to know that, but no. But your kids could go anywhere. I mean, we had the gate, but it was one of the most pleasant places to raise a family. Now, if you were 19 and you just did it, maybe trying to find female companions. It was a little bit more difficult. I think it's too late. They said, "These are 3 things happen to Winter Harbor. You run your car off the road, you get married." I can't remember.
Realist.
And you're realist. And I have met dozens of former sailors that they all fit that bill. And it was funny because a lot of the women didn't mind leaving this part of the world, at least for a little bit. But how many of them influenced their spouse to come back and raise their kids here later? And that, again, it's just a testament to the people in this part of the world. And it was Maine. but see, this is the type of thing. It's a Quonset hut. That's what the Navy would have built if we'd been left to our own devices. But it just, again, the view. But Christmas dinner in 1957. Cream of tomato soup, stuffed green olives, celery hearts, oven roast beef, Virginia ham, giblet gravy, buttered corn, hot rolls, mincemeat pie, ice cream, cake, fresh fruit, because even then they wanted it to be a little bit healthy. And then what I liked at the bottom, you can't really see it, but mixed nuts and candy. I don't know if that was describing the menu or that was just the people that were there eating. So Commander Kuhn was actually the last CO of the old radio station and the first CO of NSGA Winter Harbor, only for a couple months. He retired and then stayed in the area for many years. In fact, he passed away while I was the XO out there. Sent his wife flowers, and the men and women of Winter Harbor remember the commander. Get a nice note back from his wife. But this is what most of us would remember seeing. There was the Schoodic site, and then the Korea. Although, I have to admit, so I've been in the Navy, when I get here, 99, so I've been in the Navy 23 years when I got here. I spent my almost entire time, except for 2 years working for the Royal Navy in England, in the Pacific. Like aircraft carrier tour of the Pacific, a cruiser, 2 submarines. I knew where Korea was. So I'm in the office my first day, and somebody chirps up, "Oh, I'm going to go to Korea." And I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, great, what a great place. You'll love it." You know, and then I kept my mouth shut, which was good. It was like an hour or two later, someone said, "I'm going to Korea." And I'm going, "Oh, I'm going to Korea? Wow, what are we doing here?" And then like the third one goes, "I'm going to Korea." And then I had to do some, "Oh, the outsides, Korea." I will admit, for a good half a day, I thought we were providing more sailors to Korea than any other mass sector in the country. Again, 1967, picture taken, command inspection there behind the Rockefeller Building. And this I thought was neat, but ham radios. Again, you had a bunch of technical sailors out there running around, but they maintained a ham radio outfit. Basically the whole, I think it's not the whole time the base was open. So that was kind of cool. Ham radio, if you don't know, it's the amateur radio. So they would be able to, and a lot of times they would do, the ships would call in to the ham radio to relay messages. They're called Marsgrams. There's a whole affiliate of ham radio operators that coordinate with the ships and that too. It was, when I was on a cruise, funny story, but my car needed a new battery, and I'm deployed over the Pacific, in Korea. And so the wife calls up the Mars and says, "I need to send a note to my husband and find out where I can get a battery for the car." He goes, "Oh, honey, no, just go to Sears or say, you get a battery," because he's thinking, one, didn't realize my wife was not a 19-year-old Navy wife. She's been around a long time. And she goes, "We got an Escort diesel. He bought it. Last time he needed a battery, it took him a long time to find it. I don't remember where he got it." And he goes, "I'll send this right off." Again, just some of the pictures of the base and a wonderful fog encrusted day. It just, again, to have lived out there. So that was the library, and we built the chapel on after it. Command training in here, and then this was the club, the schooner club. And Larry, do you remember what year? I was going to call Dan and I forgot.
When was it built?
Built, yeah.
1970 or 69.
So this was a kit, and the sailors put it together and built the club. And it's now Schooner Commons, or Schoodic Commons out at the Schoodic Institute. We had our own gas station. As you can see, $1.31. And that's not a liter, that's a gallon. Again, just a good view of the admin building that was down here, and it said the fire department and motor pool and all that was down behind there. There's a group of Navy chiefs, and then a glimpse of, talk about Korea. So as technology got in the 70s, we got the golf balls set up at Korea. We'll talk about that in a minute too. So, tensions of the Cold War was selected to play part of the classic Bulleye System, 1959. The system was based on circular disposed antenna arrays, CDAs. Korea's was completed in 1965. We'll talk about more specifics, but as you can pictures and you remember, it was called it's actually nicknamed the Woolen River, which was, I thought, when I was young and was at a similar place out in California, I honestly thought it was some German engineer that had developed it. It turned out it was some mayor of a town in like 1542, but But anyway, it was off of a German design, but enabled to direction find. You know, literally in the old days, the 30s and that, or even the 20s, when you were direction finding, they called it walking. But they were up on elevated platforms with a ring around the antenna and headphones on in the middle of the weather, and they were turning this antenna to be able to, that way. And then said they come up with the circular display array. And then said 1972, the golf balls showed up at Korea. So the part that I don't, to tell you the truth, I don't think anybody's ever, I know nobody from the Navy side's ever briefed this before. But the two reasons we were here was classic Bullseye, which tied into the elephant cage, and then classic Wizard. Classic Wizard tied into the golf balls. They both were operated from the Korea site. We sent food out. We didn't have any barracks out there or anything else. Everything was based out of Schoodic. But the operation site was at Korea. So classic Bullseye is a U.S. Navy sponsored high frequency direction finding. Again, in the 60s and 70s, before we really had significant satellite communications coverage, HF was, for the most part, the way everybody was transmitting. Well, search and rescue. Somebody sinks out for the perfect storm. Anyway, somebody starts transmitting Mayday. When the Titanic, you know, they were calling every radio station they could. So that was one part of it. So search and rescue was an important part of the Navy in building these antennas. At least that's what they said. And then, I said, and in the Air Force, so we had FRD-9s. FRD-9s were, we kept the Navy put the operations site inside the Woolen Weber, and then, you know, tied everything into the building. The Air Force, because they're the Air Force, came up with a little bit different design. They had their operations building outside, away from the ground plane. It all worked, but depending on who was the host site, pretty much depended on whether you had a FLIR 9 or an FRD 10. So, you know, we're in high frequency, normal 2 to 30 megs, 10 to 150 millimeter wavelengths. It's still used today. A lot of the ham radio, and again, there's a lot of things that don't use it. I mean, we've gone to satellites, and so even the hams now have repeaters off the satellites. But there is HF stuff available. But with Bullseye, we could identify interfering sources, because if the ships weren't able to transmit because somebody else was transmitting or something, well, we could do that. And we actually worked with Federal Communications Commission to make sure that we would identify that. We look at the ground wave propagation and the help understanding multiple paths. Because I'm sure we all get younger when I had my AM radio and the sun went down and I no longer couldn't get that radio station, but I could get Wolfman Jack out of Tijuana. So again, depending on the weather and all that, it changed on how far the HF signals could go in that too. And the big part of this is what we call the 3-bearing cross. So, say you had a site at Winter Harbor, and one in Puerto Rico, and maybe one in Edsel, Scotland. They all listen to the same signal, same frequency, get a lining bearing, and that's where the person is. Now, the major and minor axes might be, 80, 100 miles across and 230, 200, 300 miles long. But if you've ever been out of the ocean, that's a lot smaller place to look than anywhere between Bar Harbor and London. So they were able to get cross bearings to be able to tie it in. Well, good. That's not my alert. So the bullseye, the outstations, again, so we're trying to cover the world. So Hawaii, Guam, Florida, Imperial Beach, California. Anybody been in San Diego, down on the Strand, the very southern part of the Strand? That elephant cage actually stayed up a long time. Panama Canal. There's Savannah Seca, Puerto Rico, Skaggs Island, which is where I started my officer career, Sugar Grove, West Virginia, Winter Harbor, Canadian forces in Gander, Newfoundland, and Masset, British Columbia. Again, great look angles cutting across both the Pacific and the Atlantic. We had one Brodie, Wales, Edsel, Scotland, Keflavik, Rota, Spain, Hansa, Japan, San Vito, Italy, Anchorage, Adak, the Azores, Diego Garcia, Guam, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. So if you're looking, you know, if you were looking, we had it covered. So, you know, we had in Japan, both in Okinawa and up at Misawa. We had in Guam, you know, we had Winter Harbor, we had Northwest Virginia, we had Homestead, Florida, we had Imperial Beach, we had Skaggs Island. We actually had Marietta, Washington for a while, but they closed that in the early 70s. We had one out here on Adak, we had one up here in Anchorage, we had one in Iceland. Again, we were trying to listen to the world, and we actually did it well. And that's the antenna out of Korea. Or, that was the antenna. But you can see, and we'll talk about it in a minute. So, frequency, the higher the frequency, the longer the wave. The longer the wave, the more, you need less antenna. So the ring around, again, should have got my crack facts done better. So look at that, and to be able to split the HF spectrum, not quite in half, but be able to better tie it in. So the low band was 2 to 9 megahertz at 40 antenna elements, and that was the 90-foot tall poles holding up the antennas. And then so it's 393 feet across. The high band was the other 9 to 32 megs, had 120 elements, and the poles were only 24 foot tall. And it was the outside ring, so it was 423 feet across. Again, I don't want to get too technical, put you to sleep, but it really is neat. So there's your, to be anyway, so your low band antennas, and then the 40 up in there. But and then the reflecting screen actually bounced it back. So the reflecting screen was the pole. These are the actual antennas. So they come, hit the screen, and bounce back into the antenna. But that's how we could get the relative bearing, to be able to tie in where it was coming from. And again, so we had gravel, we had a wire screen just all the way out to the edge of the footprint, and with the reflectors, with the wires that went up and down, the antennas, and then there was the high band antennas here with the high band reflectors. Again, it's just kind of counterintuitive. You would think, that's the antenna. No, that's the antenna. What was really neat, it ran by a system called a GYK3. This was built in 1962. How sophisticated was your car in 1962? They set up the worldwide Bulleye System. And all of those bases, they all had to, not all, had to listen to the same signal, but the signals they were prosecuting in their AOR, 4 or 5 stations had to be able to hear that, and then be able to DF it. They all had to be in sync. Rudimentary 2 computers and that, and they actually set it up with a recording because stuff would happen too quick, so they'd actually go back a couple seconds and be able to take it off of the drum to where the line of bearing, where it had hit the antenna. And they were able to coordinate that through all of those stations all over the world and provide, we had operators out there, 2 or 3 to the watch, and they'd be tipping it out. And then, there was net control facilities in the Pacific and the Atlantic. They were coordinating. They do the final, location. But to me, it's still, when I said I first got I was an HFDF officer in 1987, my first officer tour. It just boggled my mind that the system was 25 years old and was still able to coordinate across the world within milliseconds, to be able to provide lines of bearing from 4 or 5 different stations all the way across the Pacific. So that was,
Does that mean that the stations are talking to each other almost constantly?
Yes.
Back and forth?
Yep. So we all, when they came in, we all, had landline teletype systems, and everybody would, tipping it out. It was neat. It was actually, again, in the middle of the Cold War, it was actually fairly exciting. That we may or may not have listened to people other than search and rescue. I forgot to put the caveat in. I have some restrictions from prior employment that I cannot brief on anything that I personally know of. So everything I'm briefing today, I have pulled off of open source, off the internet or whatever, so there's no Jim Guest data, but it is all open source and available. But it's all probably true. Classic Wizard. This is just the last couple of years that this has come out. So in the 70s, what do we start getting? More and more. Space. The final frontier. About the time Star Trek went away, this came in 72. So ships, if they were going to use HF, had to transmit. And they would transmit. But they use their radars a lot more. Most ships only maybe twice a day would actually transmit. But if you're using your radar or whatever, well, someone figured out, wait a minute, if we put some type of collector in space, we can get this. That's ELINT, electronic intelligence. The classic Wizard system was designed to be able to identify and identify all these radars and geolocate them a little bit closer than the HFDF. And again, tying in a worldwide system to be able to tie this in. Because this is actually, when I was on the cruiser, we were still using, this was before I got to Wood Harbor, but this was one of our main sources of intel on the ships, is where everybody was. Because we could tell by their radio, Soviets used this type of radar, or Chinese used this type of radar. So it worked out really well, and it was a passive system because radars transmit, so all you needed was the receiver. We didn't need to query them or anything else. So the ground stations, because basically you just needed sites around the world that could, the satellites could download stuff too, because they would pump and dump, so they'd come fly over Winter Harbor to dump, and then fly over Edsel, Scotland and dump. And so, but they were with that circling the world, were able to do that with the ground stations. The other piece of the importance of Winter Harbor is we were actually the hub of this. So we had the schoolhouses, so everybody that went to fix all the equipment at the other sites went through us. Everybody went to operate one of those systems somewhere else came through us. All the officers that were going to be a wizard officer at one of these other sites all came through us. So we had all of the schoolhouses, which we had an operational site at 153, but we also had the schoolhouse out at 153. So that's a lot more people came through Winter Harbor because of that, because 8 12-week schools, we'd have, each one of these would have 2 or 3 or 4 classes a year. And so a lot of the Navy cryptologic technicians, T branchers and M branchers. T branchers is technical, the ELINT guys, and M branchers were the maintenance guys. But they would come through Winter Harbor school, and a lot of them kept trying to come back. And people that, if you were in the specialty, there weren't a lot of places you could go. So when I got there, Tim and Elaine Weir, I think Tim, they both were like their four tours out at Winter Harbor, because go there, go to Garcia, go to, there weren't a lot of places that they could go. Again, just to put some of the faces, the young, dedicated people that literally, it's this type of folks that won the Cold War. I mean, it just, the technical acumen that these guys did and were able to put together is just phenomenal. And the U.S. owes them a gratitude that we can never pay back. And just said, for the most part, they all loved it. Some of them loved it for the 8 weeks they were here, and they were trying to leave. But now, so 70, we're talking about 62. They came up with the CDAAs and worldwide HFDF in 72. Middle 90s. This is all going. It's real expensive to keep little bases all over the world. And that's what the Naval Security Group, I started out with submarines. And I left the submarine Navy to come into this Navy because I looked at the map, and, the San Vito, the Edsels, the ADAX. In particular, I was, as a chief, and I got commissioned, so I figured I could get to lieutenant commander and, retire. Well, at the time, there was like 22 lieutenant commander CO billets, through all of these little stations all over the place. But as technology got to the point, it just, you didn't need to have people sitting here. You had other systems that the computer could do it all and forward everything, and it just became redundant to have little bases all over the world, and they're all gone. Which, for people like me, that was just such a neat part of the Navy that literally doesn't exist. Now, I probably would have complained, when my great-grandfather got rid of his buggy and his whip and his horses and cars, but it just, the camaraderie we had at little bases like Winter Harbor was phenomenal compared to every other part of the Navy. It was a very unique opportunity, and one that I am eternally grateful for, to be able to have participated in it. And as I said, these are the unsung heroes of the Cold War. It was the people that, we were able to track all of our enemies and did it efficiently and effectively, and more importantly, we were able to know what they were doing almost as soon as they did, which helped us to be able to do policy and plans, be able to put forth, people, the ships in the right place, the right time, in order to be successful. And I said, Winter Harbor, as XO, I was sort of like this city manager, and when I see, I was kind of like the mayor. I had a fire department, we had a security, we had a police department, we had a sewer treatment plant, we had a motor pool, we had restaurants, we had housing, and the birthing and the barracks, and we had a schoolhouse, we had childcare, we had all the recreational things. I mean, it was a wonderful little town, and as a leader, I learned so much more out of places like that than somebody now who gets Navy, ends up at the National Security Agency, and works in a base with 42,000 other people. The other thing is kind of neat. So 3 former COs, more than any other NSGA, went on to become admirals. So we had Captain Stevens, Captain Whiten, and commanders at the time. It was Commander Stevens, Commander Whiten, and Commander Rogers. All went on to become admirals. And then Mike Brown, who was XO2 before me, he ended up becoming an admiral. The other thing, Rogers actually usually still come up in the summer, but Dan and Mike still come up. But it's interesting, Mike ended up going to 4 stars, which is the highest admiral rank in the Navy. And the other, like Commander Naval Security Group, was almost a 2-star. So, and then if you were lucky, you might have gotten a joint job. You might have gotten a 3rd star if you were really, really lucky. But Mike went on, became the commander of 10th Fleet, and then went in to be the director of the National Security Agency and commander of Navy Cyber Command. He was only the 2nd Navy Cyber commander. What was always interesting is we were 1610s. Everybody's got a number. And general intel officers were 1630s. Well, the director of naval intelligence was always a 1630. And they were in charge of NSA. You know, Admiral Schoodic was when I first got commissioned, but there were several intel admirals went there. So Mike Rogers was actually the first cryptologist to become the director of NSA. So just kind of cool. And unfortunately, the rest of the Navy's found out about this, and we actually haven't had a cryptologist become commander 10th Fleet for like the last 3 or 4 now, so we probably lost that, but oh well. But anyway, it was a unique place, a unique opportunity. Again, this was our, it didn't scan in well. This is the letter, March 2000, that told us that we were going to close the 30th of June of 2002. So this is kind of interesting for those of you who are around in that. You notice that doesn't say closure. It says transition. Anybody's heard of BRAC and all that? Well, Winter was too small. We didn't need to go to BRAC. But they closed the Savannah Seca, Puerto Rico site the year before us without telling Congress. And Congress had a conniption. So Congress told the Navy, you will not close any more bases without notifying us or whatever. Well, we were down the slippery slope. Now we lucked out in the fact we did not own the land. The Park Service owned the land. So we didn't close the base. We transitioned it back to the park. And you know, we said the admiral came up for me. We said that Governor King was there, was one of our guest speakers, and that I will admit that I was real busy, and I didn't pay a lot of attention. Those flags, those are single flags. Each one of them has a letter.
What's it say?
Closure, USGA. I look over later and I go, oh my. Oh my guys, they did us proud. That was wonderful. They did it. I would never have approved it, but I approved.
I never met with them, so I can see the RE at the end.
Yeah, so. But anyway, it was a bittersweet day, and then sunset on NSGA Winter Harbor. I will say though, because it was the park, you can still go out. Maybe 90% of all those little bases, they're bulldozed. Skaggs Island, which was kind of the twin to Winter Harbor on Sonoma, California. Another hard duty station. The back gate, the left side of the road was Sonoma, the right side of the road was Napa. It's a bird sanctuary. They tore down every structure that was on the 3,000-acre island that we were on. Yeah. And they said they just, because, I mean, they're like whatever. But fortunately, we were able to, and again, people like Dixon and we were able to get the money to get the CERT going and then convert, transition that into the Schoodic Institute to be able to take care of that. It is such a blessing, and for the sailors, we can come back and the Rockefeller Building is still there. The admin building got torn down. That was another interesting thing. I talked about McCunn having trouble cutting down trees. Well, we had trouble cutting down trees too. So the park took over and then they cut down all the trees so they could ski. But anyway, what a great place to one, utilize it to a really good, beneficial extent, and to be able to have people come back. That's it. The 30th of June, it was our 20th anniversary. We're going to have some type of ceremony at 8 o'clock in the morning. I've actually got the flag that we lowered on the 30th of June. So we'll raise the flag up at 8 and then we'll bring it back down at sunset on the 30th. And then the weekend of Winter Harbor Lobster Fest, the 12th, 13th, 14th, we're having a big dinner out at the Schoodic Commons. And then just a like bonfire s'mores evening on Saturday, and then a potluck picnic out at the ball field out at Schoodic. If anybody's interested in coming out and see anybody, but that's to celebrate the 20th anniversary of transition. What questions do you have? Yes?
Could you give an example or two when the ship, I mean, and it's happening all over the ocean, or trapped, when they're pinpointed? What happens after that? Once you know where it is, what do you do?
We set a submarine out and we sank it. We were actually, so if it was what we call a high value target, like, you know, a Soviet, you know, battle group or something like that, we could send their P2s initially, the ocean surveillance, and then we went to the P3s, but we could send an airplane out on that line of bearing to fight them, just to track them. We needed to know where they were, because like with Bay of Pigs and everything else, you need to know what your enemy is up to, and the most trouble is when you don't know. So if you don't know, then you start assuming all of the worst. But if you're able to keep track of all of their major ships, you know, okay, they're just out there, you know, the Adriatic, or they're out there in the Iceland-UK gap, okay, or you know, they're back, you know, went back into port. It's just allowed us to track. Much like police departments like knowing where all the usual suspects are hanging out.
To put it another way, the US Navy doesn't sit in port and play pinochle all day, 365 days a year. We are on a war footing in a very real sense, in that we are tracking enemy submarines and enemy ships, enemy aircraft, anything to do with the enemy, we track in real time. And over the decades, as Jim has pointed out, the technology has evolved from rudimentary applications of the technology involved to very advanced satellite coverage. And as a result of that satellite coverage, most of the naval security group activities that existed at one time are gonzo, never to return.
Yeah, and again, if we had an aircraft battle group out there, we'd want to know that the Soviets had scrambled a bunch of ships to intercept us. Now, hopefully we would know literally 1,000 miles away, and then we could track them. Okay, well, they are coming towards us because they keep coming on the, you know, this location. So again, it just gave us an opportunity to be able to identify the aircraft carriers. They've got it it's a 500-mile. It's not a no-fly zone because it's international waters. So I've been on ships where the Russians, you know, flew planes over us. But with the carrier, the admiral wanted to know anybody that come within 500 miles of them. So then they would launch, you know, the fighters, you know, right when they get to 500 miles or just before, so that they could then escort them through and you know, keep track of them. Because you never know. You get some idiot, some crackpot. I mean, there's some stories out there of some, you know, some rogue Russian commanders that almost started World War III because they had a hair up their ear that they thought it was time to show America, you know. So, but it was because we were able to respond, and you know, it's like basketball. You know, somebody's sitting there dribbling, and you got somebody else who's playing defense, trying to make sure that they you know, where they're going, what they're doing.
Sounds like you're heavily dependent on radar. You're picking up radar signals, you said?
Well,
Radio and radar.
back in the old days, yes.
But later on, you're not dependent on radar.
Well,
No. So what about?
I can't talk about nowadays because I like living on Gooseboro Point. No sitting and being able to read without my wife yelling at me.
So you can pick up commercial traffic as well. Like if there's somebody in a covert operation with a commercial vessel, you would be able to tell that was a threat.
That sounds plausible. The one thing we did do, and I need to stress this, because we keep hearing all the junk in that, and I said, I worked for the National Security Agency, I was a signals intelligence officer for 20 years, I rode submarines for 10. We do not collect against Americans. That's rule one. And if we do, you stop, you drop it, and you destroy everything you copied on it. So if it was an American freighter or something else, nope, we drop it. Now, if it was,
Nobody registers American at all. Flags are convenient.
no, yeah,
Not.
it's the American, it actually is American citizen, it's not the flag.
Uh-huh.
So if you literally had an American radio operator on a ship that was flagged to Panama, we couldn't, you were not allowed to copy against that American citizen. And when we were listening to all this stuff, now search and rescue, that was a different story. If we, that we could do that. But again, I would like to tell everybody that the government isn't this crazy thing that's trying to figure out what Americans do. Shoot, we couldn't find out what the bad guys are doing. Let alone trying to figure out what everybody else is doing.
I can understand with satellites, you're getting better information or faster information, fewer people, in the long run, cheaper to operate than all the bases. But wouldn't it be awful easy to get rid of those satellites real quick if we wanted to, or anybody wanted to? I'm just a little ball
I read a lot of science fiction, and all I keep hearing about is, well, even in the news, China had derelict satellites that aren't working anymore, that they accidentally blow up, or they accidentally change the orbit to run into something else. No, it is a real.
But my point is, if that is something happens to them, it'd take a long time to stand Winter Harbor back up.
Oh,
But
no, absolutely. And that's when I got commissioned. Reagan was trying for a 600 ship Navy. We can't even do 252 now. So it's expensive, and people, you got to try to weigh out, because all of us are more than willing to pay more income tax.
At the peak of the operation, how many Navy personnel would you say were stationed at Schoodic and Korea?
So, good question. How many people, how many Navy personnel? So we had about 700 active duty military with up to maybe 500 dependent spouses, children, and all that. Even when we were shutting down, my wife was the secretary at the grammar school in Winter Harbor. And when she started there in 1999, there were 186 kids. When we closed the base in June, and then we stayed to get my son started in Hudson, and my daughter started 6th grade, so she went for the first week or two. Beth quit her job, but I want to say like 32 kids in the school year of 2002. So, yeah, they lost 160 kids. And that wasn't at the peak. 4 or 5 years earlier, there would have been a lot more. Now, it was a big impact. If you look at like the 1990 and even the 2000 census data for Winter Harbor, 1,700 people in the town. I looked at the 2020, and it's 342. So yeah, it was a big. Now, the side thing, Winter Harbor, again with some of their influential people in that, the Navy couldn't sell the land. So we owned the housing in Winter Harbor. We had 3 housing areas in Winter Harbor. And so with the federal government set it up that you have to donate it. So the first realm is any other DOD outfit. And then that's special warfare. The Navy SEALs actually looked at to see if whether they can actually use Schoodic as a training base in that too. But the reality is, one, the coastline wasn't right in the winter. It would have been too expensive for them to own it by themselves and keep that up. So no other DOD needed it. So then it goes to the state. No other state. And then it goes to the county, and then it goes to homeless. Actually, is a very high priority, probably rightly so. But Winter Harbor is in not quite the middle of nowhere, but there's no resources, no transportation, no job. So anyway, so they're trying to figure out what to do with all this housing. Well, the Navy working with, with the town, Fitz-Dixon set up a nonprofit company, and the Navy was able to donate the housing to the nonprofit. The nonprofit sold the houses, and the money, they were able to donate the money. So it worked out well.